I think delayed gratification, the things that I have been most happy about getting are the things that have taken me a long time to achieve, including buying things. Waiting for something that is valuable is so much, that's part of the fun. And, the bit where you're imagining and you're daydreaming and what if this happens and what's it going to feel like? I think you get a lot more value out of things if you've got that build-up. If you can delay it, you will work out if you really need it. If in a month you really desire it, if you're still thinking about it and you're convinced and you've thought about all the different applications and then you get it, it will be that much sweeter.
Yeah.
Instead of just going, I just want the new one right now. But I just think people are too used to high levels of convenience.
Welcome to the Get Invested podcast, where we share great conversations with experts from all walks of life to uncover their secret know-how and where they invest their time, their skills and their money, and the benefits that this has created. You see, the truth is that everyone invests. Every minute of every day, we're investing our time, our skills, our energy and our money in something. Some of us are investing consciously, some unconsciously, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, and sometimes for no impact. Get Invested will help you to start living by design, not by default. I'm going to help you to make it happen, not let it happen. You'll hear the top tips on how you can live with conscious intent so that you can live more, work less, and leave a living legacy by investing now. Listen to the show to discover the top tips on how to get started, make the most of your investment journey, and ultimately to be living your dream, not someone else's. More episodes can be found on iTunes or at bushymartin.com.au/get invested. Thanks for listening, and now let's get invested. Hi, freedom fighters. How do you like your gratification? Instant or delayed? What's the difference and what's the impact? To get you really thinking about this, let me start by asking you a few more questions. Over the last week, have you slept in more than you'd like? Have you exercised less than you'd planned? Have you eaten more than you'd like? Or eaten the wrong things more than you'd like? Have you spent more time on Facebook or binging Netflix than you'd like? Have you spent money on more stuff or overspent rather than putting it towards your savings? Do you quietly know that you need to start investing, but the urgent keeps getting in the way of the important? We're talking here about the challenge of self-control, a quality that's increasingly under threat in our instant iPhone everything world. I'm talking here about instant versus delayed gratification, where delayed gratification is the ability to postpone an immediate gain in favour of greater and later reward. And self-control revolves around the challenge that we all have these good intentions and desires for ourselves in the long term, but in the short term, we do very different things that often shipwreck this. This is the age-old battle between your future self and your present self, a human struggle that goes way back to the story of Adam and Eve, where the prospect of an eternal life in the Garden of Eden gave way to the immediate temptation of the forbidden apple. Let me share with you one of my constant and ongoing challenges for self-control. Anyone who knows me well knows that I just love my food and I love my coffee. Now, for many years up until my mid-30s, I was one of those lucky ones who could eat and drink what I liked and how much I liked, and I'd never put on weight. I was a big fan of the seafood diet. If I could seafood, I'd eat it. I'd eat mountains of great food, go back for second and third extra helpings, and I was still as skinny as a rake handle. And then, without me realising it at the time, the stresses of my high ambition and workaholic habits destroyed my thyroid. Without warning, I started to stack on weight and I was continuously exhausted. It didn't matter how much exercise I did, I just kept stacking on weight. And I was dragging myself around like a zombie. 25 years later, and I've now got my thyroid under control thanks to great naturopathic help from my sister-in-law Vic Martin and others. But I need to be extremely careful about what I eat and drink and how much I eat and drink and when I eat and drink. I've only got to look at food now and I put on weight. I've learnt that to maintain my health and control my weight long term, on a short-term daily basis, I need to fast until lunchtime and minimise my refined carbs intake. Refined carbs meaning sugar, bread, pastry, pasta, etc. So this has become my biggest challenge. And it's the little daily temptations that present the greatest challenges to my self-control. Now, I love my morning coffee ritual. And I always start the day at 6 a.m.-ish in the morning with an awesome cup of coffee at the local bakery, be that the homegrown bakery, and a big shout out to Top West, or the Clarendon Bakery, thanks to Vicky, or the Red Hill Bakery or Phase 2 when I'm visiting family on the Mornington Peninsula. I love the entire coffee experience, the anticipation, the aromas of freshly ground coffee beans, the rich, creamy coconut milk, and that first sip when it tantalises my taste buds and warms me from the inside. And of course the social interaction. But here's the rub. When I'm standing there in front of the counter, soaking up the sounds and the smells, my eyeballs are confronted by a host of sugary delights. Those sumptuous soft donut holes, those soft flaky pastry brekkie pies, or the mini fruit buns just begging me to partake. And then the eternal mental battle begins between my perfect future healthy self, the one that does everything that I'm supposed to do and makes the little daily sacrifices to maintain my long-term health, against my present tempted self, the instant, immediate self that goes, come on, a tiny little pastry isn't going to kill you. And just imagine how good it's going to taste with your coffee. You work hard, Bushy, so reward yourself. You can make up for it tomorrow. So this is my daily test of self-control. If I refrain from eating those sinful sugary specialties, I get to remain healthier for longer. But if I succumb to temptation and eat the goodies, I'll put on weight and constantly feel slow and sluggish. And I'll beat myself up because I feel guilty about what I did and not what I know I should be doing. This is the tussle between the immediate and the long term, between instant and delayed gratification. When we're facing those decisions between something that feels immediately good versus something that is really, really good and actually much better, but in the long-term future, we often over-focus on the present pleasure and sacrifice the future. Again, this isn't a new problem, and the impulse of immediate temptation versus the benefits of long-term self-control and delayed gratification dates right back to Adam and Eve. So let's take a look at another example that you might be able to relate to. How often have you read or sent a text when you're driving your car? Now be honest with yourself. No one's watching you right now. Unfortunately, I know that I've been guilty of it. You're in heavy traffic and you hear the ping of your phone and you just can't help yourself but have a sneak peek. So you glance down and you take your eyes off the road and you thumb through the screens, even though you know this is potentially life-threatening to you and others on the road. The impulse to respond to your mobile's ping overtakes us in the moment, and we do what we know we shouldn't do. So let's think about it in a different way, as suggested by behavioural economics researcher Dan Ariely in his thoughts on self-control. Suppose I give you a choice between a bar of Swiss premium Lindt milk chocolate right here, right now, and a whole box of Lindt chocolate in a week. You've got the bar of chocolate in your hand now, and you can see it and smell it, and you can choose between biting into it right now or wait and enjoy a full box of chocolate in a week. Would you delay the choice? Would you wait a week to get a full box of that beautiful chocolate? Well, most people take the small amount of chocolate now rather than wait for much more later. Let's look at a slight variation on this and push the same choice into the future. So let me ask you the same question again. Would you rather have a block of chocolate in a year or a full box of chocolate in a year and a week? Now, this is effectively the same choice as before. I'm asking you whether you'd be happy to wait a week longer to get a whole box of chocolate, but in this case, when both choices are in the future. How many people would wait another week for a full box of chocolate in a year's time? Everybody, right? Because in our mind's eye, in the future, we're all perfect people. We're patient, we exercise every day, we watch what we eat, and we don't read texts while we're driving. The problem is that we never get to live in the future. We're always living in the present, and in the present, we're not the perfect person that's in our mind's eye. We tussle with temptation and how we treat the present and the future differently. So coming back to my pastry temptation when I'm getting my morning coffee, how have I learned to overcome the instant tendency to sink my teeth into those delightful delicacies? Do I have steely patience and self-control? Do I care more about my future? Well, the cold, hard, honest reality is no. I can say I do, but that would just be post-justification BS. The true answer is that I developed a little trick that protects myself from myself. And the trick revolves around my bigger love for coffee and reading good books. If I could, I'd happily drink good coffee intravenously while I sat and read a good book for hours. But I just don't make enough time to read. Now, let's think about this. If we just thought about what's important in life, we would say that my health and my weight are really important. Nobody questions that. We'd also say that itty-bitty pastries are not that important in comparison. And you'd think that this difference in importance should motivate me to hold back from buying those tasty teasers. But the reality is that this isn't how we view life. There's the additional time domain. And while partaking in the pastry won't harm me right now, it will long term in the future. And because of that, it's vastly discounted. The pastries engaging and tempting my senses are right here and right now, which becomes much more focal and central and takes more control over our lives. So what's my trick? I've developed what I call a trade-up instead of a trade-off. If I don't buy the pastry, I shout myself a jumbo bush bucket size coconut milk cap instead of a small one. And I reward myself with half an hour reading a great book on my Kindle at the end of the day. Now, this simple alternative reward has worked wonders, even though I don't follow through with it all of the time. Yes, I still cave in on occasion, and I smile like a cat in the sun as I sink my teeth into those pastry pleasures. So does my trick get me to start caring more about my weight and my long-term health? No, in fact, because I substituted it with coffee and books. This is what Dan Ariely calls reward substitution. And the idea revolves around the fact that there are many delayed rewards in life that we're just not designed to care about, like eating, exercising, saving, and investing. So can we get people to get excited about them? Unfortunately, no. And I've been trying to motivate and convince others to save and invest for years with what I would call limited success. But the reasons that revolve around our immediate nature and how to overcome it are starting to become much clearer to me now. Let's take global warming as another good example. Can we ever really get people to wake up in the morning and feel really excited about solving global warming today? Very unlikely apart from a dedicated few. I mean, it's just not going to happen. Because think about all the reasons. The impacts are really long-term in the future. We don't see it progressing. We don't see anybody suffering. And anybody and anything that we do individually has no apparent impact. So do we really care other than saying we do? For many, no. So what can we do? Can we do something like reward substitution? Can we get people to care or to behave as if they care because they care about something else? Now, the prestige Tesla electric car is a really good example. It's why it's often said that people who own and drive a Tesla smile more. They drive around while quietly saying to themselves, "Look at me, I'm a great human." In addition to that, other people can see me and they recognise what a great human I am. So one solution to our self-control problems is reward substitution. It's taking delayed gratification and changing it by getting people to behave in the right way now for different immediate reasons that still achieve the long-term result. This is the extra coffee substitute rather than the carrot or stick approach. And there's also another approach to instant gratification and self-control that's worth considering. It's what Dan Ariely calls self-control contracts. Think back to the ancient Greek mythology in Homer's Odyssey, where Odysseus and his sailors successfully avoid destruction and escape the enchanting, alluring and irresistible singing calls of the sirens by tying himself to the mast of the boat and filling the sailors' ears with wax so they couldn't hear or be tempted. And thus they avoided being shipwrecked on the rocks and drowning. This is a self-control situation where We know we'll be tempted, and we take precautions to avoid taking the temptation, like not having junk food, lollies, sweets, biscuits, etc. in the house. Temptation begins with food and ends at the supermarket. I could avoid the temptation to eat those yummy pastries by not getting my coffee at the bakery, but getting it somewhere else, or making my coffee at home. But that's never going to happen. Now, on similar lines, there was a scientific experiment done years ago where rats could feed themselves pellets by hitting either a green button or a purple button when they lit up. The green button fed them 1 pellet immediately. The purple button fed them 10 pellets, but they had to wait 10 seconds to get them. And 10 seconds to a rat is like a week to us. So which button did they hit more? You guessed it, the green button. And interestingly, the way the trial was delivered, the purple button lit up first, so they'd press it. But a couple of seconds later, the green button lit up. If the rats could hold off and wouldn't press anything more for 10 seconds, they'd get 10 food pellets. But they can't. They press on the green and only get 1 pellet instead of 10. And there was also an interesting variation that was later introduced. On some occasions, after the rats pressed on the lit up purple button, a second would pass and then a red button flashed. The red button didn't give them any food, but it turned off the green button. It's a variation of the Odysseus sirens contract where the rats can do something that they don't necessarily like to make sure that they're not tempted to do something that's not good for them. How do you think the rats reacted? Did they have enough insight, foresight and self-control to hit the red button? Surprisingly, yes. On the majority of occasions, they hit the red button. Now, most of us aren't rats, but we can apply the same principle. It's about designing useful red buttons. If we're faced with temptation with no tools to overcome it, we're likely to fail like the rats. But if we create something that allows us to bypass temptation, like the Odysseus siren contract, maybe we've got some hope. Maybe we can overcome temptation. Here's a simple red button example that I've used when I'm feeling lazy or lacking motivation. I like to exercise first in the morning, but on some freezing wintry mornings when you're all snugged up in the warm comfort of your bed, it's really challenging to get up. You just reach out and hit the alarm off button and then you just go back to sleep. So to overcome this, I merely move the alarm clock to the other side of the room or in the adjoining bathroom and then turn up the volume. And then I'm forced to get out of bed, and once I'm up, I'm on my way. And a good mate of mine, Darren Finkelstein, gave me another good red button. You'll remember Darren from Get Invested episode 108. He's an accountability partner, and one of the ways he motivates people to follow through on their important commitments to their long-term goals over time and avoid the temptation to do other more immediately pleasurable or urgent things is to get you to donate $1,000 to a political party, a sporting team or a religion that you hate if you don't achieve your monthly goals. What a great way to use a negative to create a positive. It's why I publicly declare my goals regularly on Facebook, so that I embarrass myself into following through because I don't want to let myself down in front of my friends and others. The reality is that today we have lots of daily Adam and Eve temptations, lots of things around us, lots of fast food and Facebook, lots of things that are aiming for our attention, our time, our money and our food consumption. Everything instantly and right now. And because of that, the amount of temptation around us is absolutely overwhelming. And our list of addictions are growing exponentially as our easy, instant access to everything continues to tempt us 24/7. Gambling, drinking, smoking, obesity, drugs, pornography, social media. The instant excesses of immediate gratification drown out the long-term benefits of delayed gratification in all aspects of our lives. So how can you create your red buttons? On the financial front, how can you overcome the overwhelm or the daily instant temptations and start demonstrating the self-control and delayed gratification necessary to start investing in your future and embracing money as your friend, not a fearful, evil enemy? One simple way is by adopting our kick-ass automatic saver system and our remote control money management approach that I detail in my book, The Freedom Formula. It automatically limits your spending and activates your savings by set and forget. Now, if you want to get an extract of the Kick-Ass Saver system, just jump on our website, hit the Get in Touch button, fill in your details, and put Kick-Ass Savings in the comments section, or just email me direct at bushy@knowhowproperty.com.au and we'll email it to you. Another is to surround yourself with people who are doing what you want to do and then keep each other accountable. But if you really want to embrace the benefits of delayed gratification to save and invest now, so that you can switch from broke and time poor to become financially independent and time rich, then you're going to love today's special guest, Lacey Filipich. Lacey is like my adopted sister from another mother, and we share similar journeys and similar passions in relation to helping hard-working Australians to live more and work less by investing safely, affordably and easily. What about you? Are you financially dependent or independent? Here's a quick test. A test I like to call the rich versus the wealthy test. How long can you afford to maintain your current lifestyle if your work income stopped today? Is it days, weeks, months, or years? Unfortunately for many hard-working Aussies, it's just days and weeks. For a few, it's months, and for a very few, it's years. What about you? This is the difference between rich and wealthy. Many Aussies are work income rich, but wealth time poor. For Lacey and myself, being time rich means choosing how you spend the seconds, minutes, hours and days that make up your life so you can choose how and where you spend your time. And she helps you to achieve financial independence by mastering money through saving, buying assets and eliminating bad debt. She believes that financial independence is achievable for anyone with an income and a long enough timeline. Lacey is well known for translating financial concepts into plain English and breaking them down from what seems like complex into simple, straightforward steps. Her approach to personal finance focuses on education, not prescription. She firmly believes that by helping you with some knowledge, you can make all the financial decisions that you need to help yourself. And she wants you to choose your own financial adventure, not follow a recipe. She knows that a one-size-fits-all advice process just doesn't work, as she knows that there's more than one way to skin the financial independence cat. Lacey also knows that it's never too late to improve your financial situation, and the younger you start, the better, because the magic of compounding returns has more time to take effect. And interestingly, she's not a financial advisor or a planner. She's actually a chemical engineer who couldn't accept the financial education gap anymore, and so she launched her businesses to help you fix the problem for yourself and your kids. Everything she does today, including speaking in women's prisons, teaching kids to start businesses, volunteering with groups like Women in Technology WA, and writing books, is about helping you become financially capable so that you too can become time rich. Lacey's motto is that money is about choice. The more money you have, the more choices you have. So if you're looking for help in managing your money and investing in your future, so you can start developing the self-control required to enjoy all the fruits of delayed gratification, grab yourself a copy of her book Money School, or do one of her online courses on achieving financial independence, raising financially savvy children, or becoming debt-free now. All of which you can access via her website www.moneyschool.org.au. In the meantime, enjoy this energetic and enjoyable chat with Lacey Filipich. Welcome back, Freedom Fighters. Now today I'm joined by a fellow freedom fighter, one of those rare individuals that shares the same approach to life as me. I feel like she's a sister from another mother, and she's someone I describe as a fellow outfester, one of those rare individuals who's invested to create financial independence and can now outvest by helping others to do the same. So let's get invested and welcome aboard Lacey Filipich.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. I've really been looking forward to catching up with you. As I say, there's only, unfortunately, a select few of us in Australia who've really jumped into the world of financial independence, and would love to drill down into all of that to share that with the listeners today. But for those that don't know you, Lacey, can I just get you to start by telling us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. And I'm delighted to be talking to a kindred spirit too, Bushy. It's really exciting to find people who are excited about financial independence. I agree. It's lovely to have a platform to talk about this. But on my background, I'm actually a chemical engineer, which surprises some people that I am now working in financial education. But it doesn't seem like too much of a leap, I think, when you think about analysis and decision-making and problem-solving. I started investing when I was 19 as I was studying chemical engineering. And I came out into the mining industry, moving from Queensland to Western Australia. And all the time that I was working, I was saving and investing. And so I became financially independent when I was 31. And at that point, I had changed over to consulting instead of being a full-time employee for a big mining company. And I hadn't actually thought much about financial independence or the financially independent retiring early movement or anything like that. It was just something that my parents taught me about as I was growing up, about the importance of saving and investing. And so when I got there, I was just really surprised to hear how many of my friends had never heard of the concept. And they were going, how come you don't have to go back to work after having a child? And I was saying, well, because I've got assets. What have you guys got? And they were talking about car loans and credit card debt. So that's when I started thinking about maybe I would like to be working in financial education rather than just being a chemical engineer. And so that's where it's taken me. So now I run two businesses. I started out with one, Money School, which, self-explanatory title, education about money, focusing on parents and families. And then out of that has come a second business called Make a Kids Club, where I teach kids about money through enterprise skills, because it turns out to be like a silver bullet for capability. They earn the money and then they really want to keep it.
Love it.
And so that's how I spend my days these days.
No, I absolutely love it. And you've sort of touched on it there, but I'd love to delve into it in a bit more detail. Mm-hmm. Why do you do what you now do, Lacey?
And this is, I guess I sort of briefly mentioned it. I get really frustrated when I hear how many people haven't learned about money. They didn't learn about it growing up. They didn't get it at school. And if they weren't really curious about it, they sort of go into autopilot. And there's a very common narrative that we hear about people relying on a pension or superannuation in retirement, and they just think that safety blanket's going to be there for them. And so they don't think about their money very much and might make decisions that are really not helping them. And I just feel that that's a lack of knowledge. It's not a lack of capacity. It's not something that's really hard to do. It's just that they don't get told. And so pretty much everything I do now, all the way from my businesses through to volunteering and all that kind of stuff, is all around this improving financial capability across the board as much as I can, but particularly interested in youth.
Yeah, brilliant. That's the youth is the future of tomorrow, so that's awesome. Hey, I'm going to you touched on a whole bunch of stuff that I'm going to drill down into later, but what I'd love to do, because you gave us the Reader's Digest version of your story already, I'd like to expand on that a bit if I can, and
sure.
Get you to take us back as far as you can remember, or as far as you would like to go, and talk to us about the journey you've taken in terms of where you've invested your time, your money and your interest, and what it's done for you, and what have you learned from it, and how did that get you to where you now are?
Yeah, well, I guess when I think about money, I can probably go back to when I was about 8, was when I first started consciously thinking about money, and that was when my parents divorced. And we weren't wealthy, but you know what divorce is like. It's not like you take it and divide it by 2 and everyone gets 1 each. No, you lose money in transaction costs with divorce, right? And suddenly money became important. And I guess my mum started talking to me about money around that age. I never felt any lack, never felt like we were missing out on stuff. But we were the family that, like a holiday was once a year. We drove from Brisbane to the Gold Coast and stayed in a motel, there wasn't a lot of it around. But what Mum was really good at being conscious of saving and stretching every dollar. I now realise what a magician she is. And that's probably why she became an accountant, because she was studying accounting leading up to my parents' divorce, and then became an accountant after having been a bookkeeper for a while. So she was thinking about it, seeing all these clients, all the different things they were doing, and thinking, gee, I wish I could do that, and started talking to me about it. And then so that was when I sort of started becoming conscious of the importance of thinking of money as a resource more than anything. Like it's a resource that we don't waste. That's how I think of money. And I think that sort of started, mid-primary school, really.
Wow.
And, it's funny, isn't it, now that I think back on it, there's stuff that's stuck was really the seeds were planted in primary school, which is early, right? Like a lot of us think we could go and teach teenagers this stuff. And I think, well, no, actually, you're probably better off. Like I had my first conversation about money with my daughter before she was 3.
Yeah, me too.
You know?
Me too.
Yeah,
Exactly the same. Well, it's really interesting. I don't want to go on for too much of a tangent already, but look at what the Commonwealth Bank did in inculcating, you know, I don't know, maybe I'm showing my age now, but my first memory of money was getting my little Commonwealth Bank money box.
The Dolomites as well, the yellow boxes and everything. Oh, yeah. Look, that is a bargain for them, that program. $5 a kid. It's still around today. It's in my children's primary school, and I see red every time I see it.
Yep.
I find it appalling that we sell them their contact details, and I've seen some pretty incorrigible behaviour. But that's the thing, right? You've got to learn about
but that's
challenging.
The age.
I think this.
That's the age. While our minds are open to it, and rather instill fear in money, which unfortunately I think the education system, whether it's conscious or unconscious, I don't know, but there's a certain fear around maths come money that flows out of the whole education system that then creates the ongoing issues. But I'll come back to that because I'm starting to get carried away. Coming back to it then, so money was a resource you don't waste, and you know, right from the age of 8, you started to appreciate that, given the circumstance that your mum and dad found themselves in. Talk to us about where to from there.
Yeah, well, I think, and it's entirely possible I should also say that they were talking about it a lot earlier. That's just when I remember starting to think about it. But it was watching people, starting to become conscious of how people made decisions about money. So I went to a public primary school and then went to a private high school. So I got to see kind of the average, and then people who had lots of money. And over that period, kind of got interested in money and thinking, gee, I'd like to make money. And so I actually started my first business when I was 10. And this was doing hair wraps, and I'll be showing my age here, because you say hair wraps today and people think it's a towel that you wrap around your hair, but these were, you took a little bit of hair and wrapped cotton around it, and the thing stayed in your hair for like a month. Yeah. Brightly coloured, and people attached beads. And I had been at the markets, and I had pocket money, and I was wanting to get a hair wrap, and they were charging $1 an inch. And I went, that's ridiculous. Like, I could do that. You can imagine me at 10 years old standing there. So I stood there for a good 5 minutes and watched how they did it, and then went home and practiced on my sister, and and then ended up starting a business. And that ended up with 5 of my friends working for me. So that was my first sort of like excitement about making money. It was a really good lesson in the importance of factoring in costs before declaring profits and splitting shares and stuff like that. That was probably the first lesson I got out of that.
Love it.
But it was really, really good experience. And it was, I guess, I went from there into doing normal part-time jobs, and then only started my businesses, in my late 20s. But I think that experience from when I was a child just made me fearless about it. People would be like, oh, how can you leave a job and jump into entrepreneurship? And I'm like, well, I did it when I was 10. It's not that hard. You just got to make more than you spend. And so I think that was a really positive and formulative experience for me. It's really, affected how I think about entrepreneurship.
Tell me because the move then into chemical engineering, and chemical engineering, any form of engineering, is a very, very structured career generally. Good with problem solving for sure, but quite structured. What was the attraction into chemical engineering, can I ask?
Well, I always loved maths and problem solving. So I was that kid at school who did the logic problems, who participated in the maths Olympiad, did all that stuff. And I'll be blunt, I was bright. And I had teachers who were really excited about me liking maths. And so I remember being in year 6 and my teacher was giving me like year 9 textbooks to play with, and leaving me to study by myself, which was, nice. I really enjoyed the freedom and the flexibility, and I love problem solving. It's my favourite thing to do. Even today, I like my idea of a good time is a Sudoku puzzle, anything that involves kind of reasoning, and that is, I think one of the, it's just something that I'm destined to do. So that's how I kind of ended up there. Yeah. On the way, I actually worked in childcare and gymnastics coaching, so nothing related to maths at all. But when I was old enough to get a tax file number, which in Queensland was 13 years and 9 months, I took my first part-time job, and then 3 months later took a second one. So I've never worked less than 12 hours a week during high school from year 9 on, and I would do 30 to 40 hours a week on a school holiday. And because I picked these 2 careers, childcare and gymnastics coaching, you got paid heaps more than people in McDonald's. Like, it was 3 times what my mates were making flipping burgers.
Awesome.
So you didn't have to – and I could get decent work. I could get 12 hours a week. And it was fun. I was coaching little kids in how to do gymnastics. It was quite satisfying. So I did that through high school and then into university, but just saved like a demon the whole time. Because my mum, back then when I'd started that business when I was 10, she asked me what I was going to do with the money. And when I said I was, thinking about what I could spend it on, she explained to me compound interest as like money breeding. Your money makes more money if you put it in the bank because the bank says thank you by giving you interest. And that just lit me up. So from that whole time, I saved half of every dollar I've ever earned.
Love it.
And it's just such a habit, like so ingrained now that I don't even think about it, which is a wonderful place to be in. But yes, I earned a lot of money through high school compared to a lot of my friends, especially considering they were earning, $5 an hour and I was earning 15, and they were spending all of their $5 an hour and I was saving $7.50.
Yeah,
so
massive.
Yeah, it made a big difference. Yeah, so that really got me started.
That saving habit is such a foundational exercise that I've seen doctors and specialists are earning big coin and spend every cent of it. You've mentioned that your mum was probably formative, and that was probably reinforced when mum and dad decided to go separate ways. Do you think there's an innate part of you that's just attracted to that exercise, or is there any more to it than that, do you think?
I don't know if it's an attitude thing. I do feel like I see that vision of things as being wasteful. I don't like waste. And, it's similar with most engineers, I think. A lot of and people who do technical stuff, I abhor waste. I hate it. It's the reason we turn, the power off on the light switch and you turn the water off when you're brushing your teeth. Yeah. We don't waste what we're given. And I think that I have a personality that doesn't like waste, and that extends to money. And that's probably where that has been for me, that idea of, if you make the money and then it all leaves you, then you haven't done anything. You haven't saved anything. You haven't set yourself up for the future. Yes, you might have some nice things around you. And yes, there's some money you have to spend to have a roof over your head and food in your tummy and that stuff. But I just find wasteful spending, it just doesn't work for me. And as I've gotten older, that's become stronger. The more I see of consumerism and waste, the more annoyed I get, because I just feel it's not helping anybody. It's not really delivering the value we think it's going to.
Yeah, spot on. Now, obviously, on a saving curve very early, tell me, where did you first invest that? Where did you spend it, or what was your first investment that rolled out of that?
Well, it's actually a Rothschild account, the mutual fund, and they ended up closing down. I think I must have been like 15 or 16 when they closed down. But when I was 10 and we were talking about the compound interest, and I was, interest was much better back then too. That's the other thing for people to think about. I mean, you look at putting cash in the bank now and you'd be like, 2%, yay.
If you're lucky.
I think I was getting, exactly. And I was getting sort of that, 7 to 8% easily. And, that was normal. I remember, my mum had just come out of, and my parents, when they had owned a house together, they'd just come out of 15% interest rates on mortgages, right? The late 80s. Late 80s, yeah. So it was a thing, putting money in cash and investing, it was good. But I was interested in how we could make more. And I did ask Mum if there was a limit. And she said, well, there's other ways to invest. And how about a mutual fund? And she hadn't actually done any shares or property investing herself at this point. She knew the theory, but hadn't done any of it herself. And she sort of thought, a mutual fund's a nice, easy way to go. Why don't we do that? So I ended up with $7,000 or $8,000 in this Rothschild's fund, and that just kept, over time it had accumulated until they shut it down. So, and then they said, here's your cash. And I was like, that's nice. But it was more than I'd put in by a fair margin. So I was very delighted. And that, I guess, that reinforcement too, you have that experience of, I've saved, I've seen the interest, it's grown. You get really excited, and it gets you through those periods where maybe you have a bad investment or something doesn't go the way you want it to, because you have this positive, like, nope, this is a very good principle to follow and it's worked for me before and I'm going to carry on.
Yeah, love that. So it rolls out of the Rothschild account. What did you do with it then?
Well, I went into a savings account until I could decide what to do with it, and I was planning to buy a car. So my mum had given me her crappy old Mitsubishi Magna, which was a lovely poo brown and very attractive.
Poo brown Mitsubishi Magna years ago.
Yep, they're pretty classy. They're a bit of an icon. I, for some reason, I don't know where I got the idea, but I had this idea I was going to buy a Skyline, like a fancy car.
Nissan Skyline, love it.
Yeah, okay. That's dating me as well. Yeah, I think, because I don't know if they make them anymore, but it was, for some reason I had in my head that was this car that I wanted. And I said to Mum, I'm thinking about buying a car, and I showed her my money, and she's like, Lacey, that could be the deposit on an apartment.
Bingo.
And I went, oh, and you talked about this. It's this concept of this planting the seed. It's not that you have to have a lecture. She literally just said that line to me, and I went away and came back like a week later going, so if I didn't buy that car, how would we go about this property investing thing? And that's where it all started. When I was, I think I was about 18 when we had that chat, and 19 by the time I bought that first property.
Yeah, awesome. So I'd love to go there actually while we're on it.
Mm-hmm.
So the interest in property was driven a little bit by Mum by the sounds. What did you do in terms of educating yourself and sort of getting comfortable with it before you went out and put the cash on the dash?
Well, it's also a bit my dad too. So my dad's a builder and a project manager, and so he'd done lots of buying property and renovating it, and talked to me a lot about what values in the land versus in the building and stuff like that. So he'd done a bit of that with me through his work, not intending to teach me about money, just telling me how his job worked, when I was curious about what job I might want to do. And I was asking him, because he ran his own business through most of my life as well.
Yeah.
So that was sort of a bit of a foundation of interest in, you can, buy things and renovate them, to add value. There's sort of that concept.
Yeah.
And my mum had actually taken me to a seminar when I was 17. It was at the local tavern, and there was a guy there. And, you often see this education that's not education. It's a sales pitch.
Yeah.
But we just lucked in and got a guy who did pure education. He wasn't selling anything. I think he might just be like, I wish I knew this guy's name, but he'd probably be someone you'd have on your podcast now, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
He was literally just doing education because he felt it was important. And we went to this free seminar, and he talked about how property worked and advised us to read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he left me with one phrase, which was buy quality, undervalued assets. That's the phrase that sticks in my mind.
Yeah.
From that particular seminar. And that's where I guess we started thinking about it. And then when my mum mentioned it to us, so it wasn't a brand new idea to me. I sort of understood that you could buy property and that people would help pay off your mortgage and, by being tenants, that kind of thing, and all the bonuses that came with that.
Yeah.
And then that was it. That was sort of, so when Mum said it, I was already a little bit primed. And then she got a lot of advice because she had worked for an accountant who was financially independent as well by this point. She started talking to her boss about, because she had seen a lot of people who'd come through as private practice who she was doing accounts for them and doing their tax for them, and they had investment property. So she sort of understood how the back end worked. So she was able to teach me that way, which was really good.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Okay, so this is all happening alongside you're about to leap into uni, or you've probably started uni and you're doing chemical engineering. Tell me how that rolled out from there.
Yeah, well, I think chemical engineering, I'm lucky I found it. It's the perfect career for me, and it was the perfect mix of problem solving, but not so esoteric that you couldn't really find something common everywhere to talk to people about. Lots of opportunities, and I was really happy that I found it. So in the second year, when you specialise with engineering, that worked really well. And I remember telling my lecturers that I was buying an apartment, and they all thought I was crazy. My friends all thought I was crazy, and they were all like, you can't afford that. But it ended up being cheaper. After the mortgage, so the mortgage was $110 a week, and I could rent out the second room for $90 a week. So once I'd added in power and water, it was about $40 that I was spending a week, and if I'd wanted to rent a room, it would have been $100 a week. So I was ahead right from the get-go, right? And it was just very good timing.
Brilliant.
So I finished my degree, so I spent 2 years in that apartment after my dad helped me renovate it because it was absolutely hideous, like brown carpet, brown brick walls, brown ceiling. It was
would have gone with the brown Mitsubishi.
It was a very good look. Which, of course, was the car that I kept, right? Because I said, well, that's it. I'm just going to stick with it. What's the point in getting a fancy car? I'm only going to university. So I lived in there for a couple of years and rented out the second room, and then I got a job in Kalgoorlie, which is Australia's red light district. So I moved from Brisbane. Yeah,
I spent some time in Cal. I love my time in Cal.
It's fabulous.
My memory of Cal, Lacey, I think there's about 30-odd thousand, but when I was there was about 30-odd thousand people, and I think there's 35 pubs. So,
yeah, it's pretty similar. Yeah, it was 30,000 people when I was there in 33. So yeah, like a thousand head per pub, and it was a revelation. Like I'd gone to a private girls' school, gone on to one of the Sandstone universities. So like, and when the first time I went out, I went into a skimpy bar. I didn't know where to look. Yeah, I didn't know where to look. But then by the end of it, like after 18 months there, you're like, you know, like I'm mates with the skimpies. You walk up to them and like you get served first because you're a girl.
Yeah.
There was lots of advantages. But yeah, I loved it in Kalgoorlie. It was fantastic. But I kept the apartment because what I discovered is I could rent it for $200 a week to some university students who were coming, you know, a couple of years below me. So I knew them, and I didn't need an agent at that point because we were in such good terms, and they were excellent tenants. So for a couple of years, they rented the apartment, and I kept it. And when I came over to Western Australia, I bought a property in Kalgoorlie, and because I didn't want to pay rent at this point, I was like, oh, well, it works out again. I was renting out the second bedroom again. So it was still cheaper. And the company also had a fantastic golden handshake clause, which if you were moving permanently, they would buy the house at market value. So I knew I had this kind of get out of jail free, you know.
Awesome.
It was, yeah. So like again, all of the graduates are like, why are you buying a property? And I'm like, because they'll buy it. They'll buy it back.
The question is, why wouldn't you buy a property? That would be the question in my head right there.
Exactly, yeah. So that was pretty entertaining. And then I bought another apartment in the same block in Brisbane while I was over there as well, because another one came up. It was a little block of 6, that little apartment that I bought when I was 19, and another one came up and I bought that one as well. So I had 2 in the same block. But so I was doing that, and I was, 23, I think, at that point, or 24. And yeah, it was all just, they were just paying themselves off, like there was, there often is in those first couple of years where you might be out of pocket a bit, and the negative gearing wasn't a problem then because I was making good money.
Yeah.
But over time, they very quickly produced an income. I don't think that that first apartment was negatively geared for more than a year. Like it was a tiny amount of time. Yeah, in perspective now, you think about some people that are buying properties that might be negatively geared for 10 plus years if the rents don't go up quick. So, very good environment. But yes, that's how I got into the property investing stuff. And it was just it's been a positive experience. I've made plenty of mistakes and some very costly ones, but I've just really liked the hands-on part of property. I have enjoyed that, being able to see something physical and the idea of being able to improve it and add capital value sometimes. Haven't gone down the subdivision route though. Haven't done that myself yet.
Yet though, I'm hearing yet probably in there somewhere.
Yet. Yeah. It's one I'd like to explore next.
yeah. I've done a few, and as an architect, it's sort of come second nature, that stuff. But done the right way, it can be really good. Actually, can be really good.
Yeah.
So awesome. So what I'm guessing now is that, like most people in the resources industry, excuse my French, you work your ass off. Because it can be extremely demanding, and you sound like a perfectionist, so you sound like someone who's going to give 150%. You won't stop at 100, you'll go full bore. How did that go? Because I went all right for a while. Yeah, Kalgoorlie was great from the perspective of there's a high turnover in country towns for mining stuff, right? You get a lot of turnover, so you get a lot of responsibility quickly. So I got exceptionally good exposure. Great training. It probably put me ahead of city grads by a couple of years easily in the level of experience that I had. Yeah.
And it is one of those ones where they'll give you as much as you'll take. So there's lots of shift work. I was doing, did 2 days, 2 nights, 4 off. For about half the time I was there, which meant that I had, 4-day breaks, which was wonderful as well.
Yeah.
Lots of fun. And Kalgoorlie was great. And I was, young and single, and, it was heaps of fun. Just spent a lot of time dancing and drinking, which is, what life should be like when you're that age, I guess.
Exactly.
Couldn't do it now. But yeah, it was good. But I had a very much a, work hard, play hard sort of life in Cal. And then I got a transfer to Kwinana, which is about 40 kilometres south of Perth. So and they called it the retirement village. I was disgusted that they sent me there because I wanted to go to one of the other FIFO sites, but they said, no, we want to send you there because you're a chemical engineer, not a metallurgist. And it's much more complicated. You'll like it more. And they turned out to be right, which was good.
Okay.
But yeah, coming to Perth, I came and my relationship started at about that time. I'm now married to Adam, and we met in Kalgoorlie and liked each other. And then when I moved, which was really great timing, wasn't it? We became partners. And then I guess so I sort of moved focus to sort of what we were going to do for living arrangements, and then spent a lot of time working on him to get interested in investing. But as I was working through...
Let's jump straight in there.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, you had to work on him. Talk to me about that. He was a bit nervous or...
Hates debt. Okay. He hates debt. It's just he's anti-debt. So he is an even better saver than I am. He had just come back from a year travelling around Europe, and I think he'd managed to get away with spending under $20,000 for a year of travelling through Europe. Yeah, it was impressive. Like, he is super frugal. And not to the point where he had a nice car, like that was his indulgence, but it just was he would pick one or two things that he really loved, spend money on those, and just everything else got saved. And so I was talking to him. He was investing in shares, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying he'd saved about $300,000 as like a 27-year-old, I think, when we met. So that's a lot of cash to have accumulated when you're only been in. That's the thing. He's a saver. I think I'm a saver, but he's like a proper saver. He'd been investing in shares and had mutual funds and things like that. And I was talking to him about property, and because I was saying, well, I've got similar amounts of equity to you. And he was going, how have you done that? Because I'm 5 years younger. And I was explaining, bought the property and paid off some value off the debt, as well as the increase in that. And this produces rent now. And he was just going, what? How does that work?
Yeah.
So he found it quite interesting, but it turns out he really doesn't like debt. So we did eventually buy an investment property together, and this was while we were both still working full-time and before I had my major turning point. But we actually bought it sight unseen. My mother was living on the Gold Coast, and she wanted somewhere to live, and I was like, well, see if there's something you like. And she found this amazing townhouse, and, she happily rented it off us for 6 years.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, so that was just a mutual beneficial sort of arrangement. She was like, well, if I'm going to rent anyway, and she rented it out, just a little bit below market price. But obviously we didn't need an agent. It worked out really well. So that was his first experience of going into debt. And like these days he kicks himself because, of course, he had $300,000 in 2005 in Perth. And property prices doubled in the next 5 years. And so he now gets angry at himself for not having bought then.
Yeah.
But his aversion to debt was really the big thing. He didn't want to take on massive amounts of debt. And, they don't have to be massive amounts of debt was my point to him. But it did put him off that. So he's much more the shares kind of person.
Yeah, has that changed then since the involvement in the Gold Coast townhouse and whatnot? Has he shifted a bit in that regard, or is he still very risk averse when it comes to debt?
I think he's still fairly risk averse, and what I found hard. So he's also an engineer, so you can imagine what this is like. We're two very logical people.
Spreadsheet within an inch of your life.
Yeah, my poor children. If they don't like maths, they are really in trouble. That's okay. That'll be fine. So, but what I found was actually not so much the financial stuff. It was the administrative stuff of owning a property that really Adam struggled with after a while. So for me, having had properties before, things break. They need to be replaced. Yeah. And I don't spend a lot of time and get lots of quotes. I tell the agent, get a couple of quotes comparable. Please go ahead, because I like it fixed because I want my tenants to be happy. Yeah. Whereas we'd get a request for some piece of maintenance and he would spend, hours looking up prices of things, and then he'd be like, I could do that cheaper. And I'm like, sure, so we'll just pay for you to fly from Perth to the Gold Coast. Do you think it'll be cheaper than that? And he'd be like, no. So we'd end up having these discussions that I was like, this is taking much longer than it needs to. We are wasting time here.
He's burning his time and money researching it to save $100 on changing the light globe or the door handle.
Exactly. And so there came a point where I was like, I can't take it anymore. I can't own a property with you. You either got to give me right to just make decisions up to a certain amount and not involve you, or you've got to speed up. And so that's actually, it's less so. I think a lot of that is his frugality, and also he's very handy. So he does look at something and go like, oh, I can't believe we're paying that. I'm like, yes, but we don't have to fly. It's already cheaper. It's been sort of a thing for him. But he has recently, because I did, after we sold a couple of investment properties because we did buy another one together, and we now have a principal place of residence that we own together.
Yeah.
And we do own that. We did make that decision. That was not a financial one. That's much more of a security family one. Yep. But, I said, I'm not sure I'm ever going to invest in property with you again, Adam. And he has recently been asking me, because Perth property prices are beautiful for buyers at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
And,
I've just got some investors into some properties in Perth, actually, because as a contrarian, I think it's perfectly placed.
Oh, absolutely. I saw it. There was a 2-bedroom apartment in Rockingham went for 120 grand a few months ago.
Yeah.
It's like that's like early 2000s pricing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he has started going, well, what do you think about it? Should we buy something else? So I'm actually we'll have a different negotiation this time. It will be an upfront, okay, I don't mind buying property with you, but I would like right of decision up to $1,000 if there's maintenance, and after that I'll get you involved.
You sound like a property manager. You give the property managers the amount that they need to go away and spend. Hey, I'd love to delve in here because this is really interesting, because I get to see couples, we've been doing what we've been doing for nearly 15 years now, and it's really interesting when you get a couple that are different ends of the spectrum on various aspects of all of this. And it always ends up being negotiation. And sometimes the yin and yang can be really useful because it really tests the edges so that the decisions that you're making ultimately that come out of that are probably better. Do you find that with Adam?
I do, yes. I think we are complementary. I mean, the other point is we're on the spectrum of save versus spend. You've got the people who are like super frugal, and then the people who just can't hold $1 for, because it burns a hole in their pocket. He and I are both towards the saving end. So that helps. Yeah. We don't argue about how much we spend. We don't, I can't remember in 15 years us ever going, why did you spend that much money on that? We just don't, because we both are instinctively sensible with our money, and we have similar values with that stuff. But the investing is a place where we do differ. So we actually do invest in shares separately.
Yeah, okay.
And I have kept investment properties that he has nothing to do with, and he will never have anything to do with, because I don't need to have that discussion with him. Yeah. So we actually find the daily spending, how our money gets divided up, how much goes into investing versus how much gets spent on things, that's not a problem. We're really well aligned, but we have done some investing separately, because I just don't think there's any point. And I should also add, I didn't say this at the beginning, but my parents were, my dad's a spender and my mum's a saver, and I saw what that was like. And that was actually a part of the reason that their divorce came about, is my dad, and he acknowledges it, he knows this about himself, he has trouble holding on to money. He likes to spend it, whereas my mum is instinctively a saver, and that caused tension. So I guess having seen that, I realised you don't have to break up over this if you've got an agreement, if you know what you're going to do. And so over the years, we've agreed the places where we're comfortable investing together and where we're not. And when you know yourself better as well, having done a lot of different things, now I know he doesn't like debt, and now I know he hates maintenance, So, I've got that knowledge now that I didn't have when we first started investing. So I think, starting with a few things and finding out what works and what doesn't, but not saying, hey, we need to write this off because we disagree. It's just, okay, well, you do your bit over there and I'll do my bit over here. That.
There's a mutual respect there, and that allows each other the space. Tell me, let me ask this question, because there's all sorts of, everyone's got a view and a different theory on this, and my view is that there is no theory, it's whatever works. But do you have joint accounts and separate accounts, or how do you manage that side of the equation so that works for you both?
Yeah, we do have both. So we have joint stuff, which is for our principal place of residence and for our living costs. Yeah. So that is joint. Yeah. And we do some investing together. Sometimes we will invest in shares, or like I said just before, he's thinking about an investment property. So, we'd look at taking some money out of savings as a deposit and that kind of stuff. So there's not a really clear line, but absolutely everything that is household and children driven, and, basics like cars and, all that sort of stuff, that all comes out from joint accounts. And then we both have our own bank accounts that we're not signatories on. So he knows that I've got an account and I know he's got an account, and we roughly know how much is in it. Yeah. But neither of us has access. And so I think there's a spectrum as well, and I've seen happy couples who go all separate, 30 plus years paying half of the mortgage each, like that. No problems. Yeah. And then others who go all in, I think it's a decision that you make. But I think particularly being a woman and an independent woman, having seen my mum split up from her husband, I think there's value for both sides for having some money over which you've got your own discretion, For him for the man as much as the woman. But for the woman, there is that safety aspect of, I think it's 1 in 6 women will experience financial abuse in their lifetime. And I'd hate to think that they can't leave because all the money's in a joint account,
Totally.
I think of it as staying money, I'm staying because I can, I could leave. I could afford to leave. But I'm not going to. So that's how I kind of think of it.
100% get it. And I think in this day and age, unfortunately, with the divorce stats where they are, both parties need to be comfortable with and able to manage money. I know my good parents, God bless them, Mum wouldn't have had a clue. She survived on $70 a week right up until not long before Dad died, because she was of the belief that that's all she could afford. So made all her own sauces and cooked everything and grew everything in the backyard. When Dad died, a big cry for help for me to say, Johnny is my first name is John. Johnny, I don't know what to do. Help. And that's because she had no knowledge. It was all Dad's stuff, and that worked fine. There was a complete trust and whatnot between them, but a very scary position for her to end up in at that late stage of life. Very scary.
And going through grief at the same time, it just seems like insult to injury, right? Having to come up to speed, and that's, that is a bit of a risk too. I also, again, this is probably the independent woman thing. This idea of being typecast into we have a role, I find a bit risky. Maybe it's my risk aversion more than being a woman. I feel like if I can't remember how to cook a steak, what happens if Adam's sick? He can't be the only one in the household who knows how to cook a steak, right?
Totally.
We should all be able to do that. So, and it is that thing where I do try to make sure that we are talking about stuff, even though I'm the person who gets all the bills, so I just pay them all from our joint account because it's all on my BPay. But I make sure he knows, because otherwise something dreadful happens, I go under a bus. It would be horrible to have to come up to speed at the same time as dealing with all that grief. I can only imagine what your mum must have been swimming in it. Poor thing. God.
Yeah, she was. And I ended up basically managing it for her. And then sort of bring her education and confidence up over time. But that's really interesting. So okay, so I keep taking off on a tangent there, but sort of back to the exercise, because I'm sensing, and I could be wildly wrong here, but I'm sensing you probably almost worked yourself to an early grave and then had an awakening. Can you talk us through that part of the journey, if I am right indeed?
Yes, you are correct. I did do that. A common mistake for young, enthusiastic people. And when I came out of university, I was like, I'm going to be the CEO of a mining company one day. So I was willing to work my butt off. And that ambition, of course, has changed a lot over time. So I did work my butt off, and I did take on every piece of responsibility I could. And I discovered I have a very particular set of skills, which is the ability to be friendly while making people change. And change is really hard in big companies. I worked for a massive mining company, and the effort you have to put in, you have to have a charisma, a force of personality almost, to get people to buy into change. And it's extremely draining work, but I'm very good at it. It turns out. So it's actually a bit of a niche. I hadn't realised how unusual that combination was.
Totally.
And so I did this project, which is super energy intensive, for 7 months. And I had to lead a team where we did a transformation at our refinery. We resulted in an 11% increase in production. It was worth tens of millions of dollars. We basically saved this refinery from being told it was going to get closed down. And that's happened multiple times in that refinery's life, because it is very borderline, but it was just one of those times where they needed someone young and energetic, and they promoted me very quickly. So it was really exciting. And I thought, okay, well, 7 months, that's good, I'll do that. And then they said, can you come to Kalgoorlie and do it again? So back to where I had been, and I didn't get any time off.
Wow.
And so I ended up doing this about 18 months of this intense change work where it's unrelenting. And you're not just using your brain, you've got to persuade people. And I actually had hated public speaking until I did Toastmasters at 23, but I found myself spending a lot of time with groups and educating and bringing them along. And eventually I got really sick. And it turned out that it was a virus, but the theory is that I was so run down because I had not been looking after myself because I'd been working too hard that I really took a hard hit. And so I ended up bedridden for 5 weeks. It was terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. It was that moment where you suddenly realise you are mortal, which, at 26, I hadn't really known that. So it was a big, big shock. And, as a result of that virus, I lost half the hearing in my right ear, which is, so now I've got this permanent hearing loss that reminds me every day not to work too hard. Not to work too hard for long periods of time without break, I think is more the point.
Yeah.
And that's what from that, I learned about myself that I am definitely a better campaign worker. Like I am better going 100% for a few months and then having a break than I am at trying to find balance. It's just my natural way. So that event was terrible. And then it got backed up with my sister taking her own life a few months later. So that was... Oh, yeah, it was full on. It was one of those, where you go, wow, what a year. This is crazy. I mean, a lot of people feel like that about 2020, right? That's what 2008 into 2009 felt like for me. You go, really? Again, another thing? Oh, my goodness. And so that was it gets talked about as a Saturn rising moment because of the age. Apparently this is a numerology thing, but I think it's actually where you've been out of university for 5 to 6 years, and so you've discovered whether you like your career or not. And I just realised I couldn't keep going the way I was. So I changed my life. And took on contract work instead, where I'd work 6 months of the year, always across winter, and then I'd have 6 months off, and we did that for 3 years. And Adam was able to do it with me. So, it was really good. So out of that horrible experience came a really positive lifestyle shift that made me value time much more than money.
When you're sitting in bed for 5 weeks, and if that's around at the same time that your sister took a life, which is just tragic, would have been a lot of reflection, I'm imagining. What were you feeling at that time, and what were the light bulb moments that sort of created the awakening that said, okay, I'm going to do this differently from here?
Yeah, well, it's a very much value of your health came across, obviously. I think anyone who has that, they talk about the 5 Ds, death, redundancy, disaster. There's a few, I think divorce, and there's another one that I've forgotten. But, the moment you get sick, the disease strikes, it is a turning point where you learn, oh my gosh, I can't keep going. I'm not invincible. I have to look after my health. So it certainly awoke in me a need to exercise and feed myself better and drink less. That's the other thing. I was, after being in mining in Kalgoorlie, it's like compulsory to be able to sink a beer, So things like that I learned very quickly. So that's the very obvious stuff. But then I guess the less obvious stuff is the existential thing. Why are we here? Am I really going to slog my guts out? Because I had no doubt that if I slogged it out for 20 to 30 years, I could get to CEO. Do I really want to do that? Is that really the best use of my time? I felt like I had wasted a lot of time. And for what? Like, the company was fine without me for 5 weeks. I'm not essential. They were able to, find people to fill the gap. They carried on. It wasn't an issue. So, you get that sort of, I might derive a lot of meaning from it, but the company, I love the company, but they don't really need me.
Yeah, that's quite confronting though, and a lot of people don't get to that, and then they just jump back on the horse, and then away they go, and then they fall over at 60. And you're probably fortunate in that you had that health scare early enough to be able to go, right, there's got to be a better way here, rather than those that I see them, they start to fall apart bits and pieces over an extended period of time, and then they're bedridden for good and can't do anything about it.
Exactly, and you're right. It's something now that I wouldn't change. I'd love to have my hearing back, but I think that's a fair trade. Having lost half the hearing in 1 ear, I'm like, that was a good deal to change my life and have this wake up early. It is sad that we have to wait so often for a massive big deal. For it to sink in. But that said, it happened early enough that I was able to do something significant with it. And, of course, I had been investing the whole time. That was the advantage I had. Yeah. So I could afford to say, well, I'm just quitting my job. Yeah. And we went and did 3 months overseas, and that was my first real overseas trip. So I got to see what it was like seeing other cultures. I did come back after that and keep working. It was a while later that I resigned, but the seed had been planted by that point, that whole, what do I want to do? What do I actually want to do? Because every level I've been promoted, I just work out you're just more meat in the sandwich. And I think I had this vision of you get to CEO and you're in charge. No, you're not. You report to the board. It's just this. It's a never-ending cycle, and then the board reports to the shareholders. That's how commerce is built. It's just this never-ending linkage to someone else. So autonomy was just something that the kind of autonomy I was hoping for, where you could do, very serious sweeping changes. It's just never going to happen in a big corporate. So, well, and don't I sound cynical? Like that's how cynical I was at that point.
No, I don't. I think you sound objective, and you're smart enough to work that out way early in the piece, rather than get there and go, holy moly, I've spent my whole life getting here, and now I don't have the freedom or the autonomy that I thought I was going to get anyway.
Exactly. And wouldn't that be a letdown, right? So I'm very lucky it happened earlier, and it did force me to confront this whole, what are you actually trying to be CEO for? Like, and it was just autonomy. It wasn't actually the notoriety. It wasn't the pay. It wasn't that stuff. It was autonomy to make the change I wanted to make. And then I was like, well, I don't have to be in a big company to do that. And so that was a good awakening. And it did start me thinking at that point about, well, what would I do then? Because I didn't really want to sit around doing nothing. I like doing nothing for small periods of time. A few months of mini retirements is right up my alley. But, like I wrote a book for kids in my first mini retirement. And, I always want a project to work on. And I like having the downtime. But I was kind of like, I don't want to not work forever. I want to still work. What would I do? And that's when, I was doing the consulting, and that's when I started thinking about, well, why don't people know about money? Because a lot of my friends were going, oh, how come you can just quit your job? And I'm like, well, I've got 2 years of living costs and savings. I'll be fine. And they were going, what? What are you doing with all that money? I'm like, well, that's what that's for.
Exactly.
So that was when, the first little sort of thinking about, financial education, we need more of that. And then that became a bigger and bigger drive. So I haven't been quick about it. None of this has been like an instant lightning moment. It took me several months to come to some of these decisions. But yes, I'm very grateful that they happened in my 20s, not in my 40s or 50s.
Let's dig in there around that subject of not many people understanding the benefits of, the drip on a rock investing over time. I'd love to dig into the old delayed gratification exercise for a minute, because it doesn't get much of a mention these days, and yet, we seem to live in this life where with an iPhone it's instant everything right now. And yet any of us who have achieved financial independence know that delayed gratification is a big part of it, but delayed gratification doesn't mean you do without. It doesn't mean that you suffer or you're not sort of living on dog food for the time that you're getting this done. Expand on that a bit. What are your thoughts around delayed gratification?
Oh, I think I'm pretty sure that's part of my makeup as well. I think delayed gratification, the things that I have been most happy about getting, are the things that have taken me a long time to achieve, including buying things. Including, waiting until I had enough money to buy a decent leather jacket, and then I still have that leather jacket, and it's wonderful, a high value, took me a while to save for, but I am still wearing it 20 years later. It was a really good investment, not in the terms of getting a return out of it. That was probably down to about 5 cents a wear by now. But that whole waiting for something that is valuable is so much, that's part of the fun. And I even see it now. I run an awards program with Women in Technology WA. It's one of my volunteer roles. And that bit between where you've nominated and when you find out the answer is actually the bit to savour. The bit where you're imagining and you're daydreaming and what if this happens and what's it going to feel like. I think you get a lot more value out of things if you've got that build-up.
Yeah.
Even if you go and spend the money. But what I have found is in that process is when I think, oh, well, I would love to have a holiday like this, or I'd love to buy, I don't know. I don't really buy very much. I'm not into cars and stuff, but maybe it's like, an expensive dinner or something like, oh, I really want to go to Wildflower. That's in Perth. Take out a small personal loan, right, and go to this restaurant. It's the months and months of salivating over it that are actually the best bit. And if you can't get gratification, like real gratification, real satisfaction out of that, you're not going to get it when you get the thing. And often I find I don't want the thing. I'm happy with the daydream, and it was lovely, and I thought about it, and then I go, you know what, I'm not going to get much value out of that. There's been a lot of things that I would have purchased on a whim that I don't purchase because I want to think about whether I really want it. And, gee, it would have been a waste to buy them. So I think that, if you can delay it, you will work out if you really need it. If in a month you really desire it, if you're, still thinking about it and you're convinced and you've thought about all the different applications and then you get it, it will be that much sweeter.
Yeah.
Instead of just going, oh, I just want the new one right now. But I just think people are too used to high levels of convenience, I don't mind if my internet's a little bit slow because my phone's a little bit slow because I'm not in a rush. If you're in a rush or you're always busy and you're running from thing to thing, you pay a tax for that in the form of convenience spends. So that's the other side of it, I guess.
How do you think we turn that around? I've sort of debated this in my head a lot. How do we convince people that there is real merit in delayed gratification? Have you got any thoughts around how we can change people's thinking on that?
Well, I think there's a great opportunity there's a lot of concern about the environment these days. Well, there's been a lot of concern about the environment forever, but it's really reaching this peak point now with climate changing and with pollution. I think pollution is probably the biggest lever rather than climate change.
Yeah.
People are getting disgusted that the oceans are full of plastic and that all this waste is in a landfill and all that sort of stuff. And like that is because we buy too much crap. So I think there's actually a bit of a lever there for people who are, claim to be wanting to care for the environment, or they feel guilty if they don't. Well, you've almost got a big stick you can wield in your own head over yourself going, well, every time I buy things, if I don't really need it, then I'm contributing to this problem. So I think there's some of that sort of attitude. I also think that people in the self-interested way, more the dangling carrot, is like every dollar you spend, you had to earn.
Yeah.
So you go and buy that fancy new iPhone. How many hours did you have to earn work to do that?
Yeah.
And was it worth it? Like, what could you have done with that time otherwise? That's how I make most of my decisions now. Is like, was it worth it? Was it worth spending the time to earn that money? And I think you'd find a lot of the time you go, well, if I could have had 3 hours back instead of spending that money on that dinner, or if I could have had that week back instead of buying that iPhone, I probably would have. If you can start thinking that way, it makes a big difference. But it's just a habit building thing with a lot of it. I like the 30-day challenge too. I think if you want a practical thing to do, try going out without something for 30 days. If you really want it afterwards, then have it back. But you might find after 30 days you don't care and that you don't need to spend money on that thing anymore, So that's a good practical way to do it.
It is. I love that. The other aspect of what I liked about what you said there was around the aspect of thinking of it in time, not money. Can you expand on that? Because I think that's a crucial thing that a lot of people miss. They focus on money, but the real asset that all of us only have limited amount of and don't get to get a lot of free amount of it is time. What's your thoughts around that?
Well, I think we're very similar in this outlook, Bushy. I think time is the irreplaceable thing. It's a non-renewable resource. I can always get more money. I cannot get more time. I can't go back to my 20s, would I want to actually? No, probably not. Time is irreplaceable, and it is the greatest asset we have, and our discretion over our time should be as much as we can get, I think, if we want to add value as humans. So, I think about the number of people who go and spend 40 or 50 hours a week in a job they don't like, and then worry about problems that are facing the world, things they would like to work on, and they can't afford financially to go and work on those problems because they need the money for food and they need the money for rent. And they get caught in this downward spiral of dependence, and you have to be always earning a wage. And, of course, that is the traditional sort of lifestyle. Like if you think about baby boomers and older than that, there's this tradition of, you work hard for 40 or 50 years and then you get your reward at the end. Retirement is your reward. Yes, you're old, but you get that time to be free then. That's when you get that, rather than thinking, well, no, that can happen a lot earlier in life. If you're sensible about how you use your money, you can create a lifestyle where you become time rich, and you then get to decide how you spend your time. And there's no rule that says you have to wait till 67 when you can get a pension if you think about it early. So
I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
just that simple switch to time rich, and I love that term because it conjures up a really abundant image to me. And on the flip side of that, I don't know about you, Lacey, but I hate the word retirement. I've expunged it doesn't exist in my vocabulary, actually, because it has all these negative, I'm about to die connotations, don't you think? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've certainly designed it that way. When you think about how retirement got invented, it was, a socialist principle of trying to support people who were 70 when the life expectancy was 70. They said, if you manage to make it to 70, you deserve a break, have some money. And that's what it was designed for. People expected to work till they died, in the late 1800s. And we just sort of built this system and we've stuck with it, even though we don't really need it anymore. But the thing is, I guess, a lot of people do need it because the only time they're ever going to get this money that's going to support them and replace a wage is when they meet the criteria of an age pension, because they haven't spent and they haven't, as they've gone through life, put enough aside to invest and create that income themselves. And that's that's largely because of we don't teach them. And if they didn't get curious about it, they didn't learn. So it's this downward spiral that creates this, yes, it's normal. Work your whole life until you're exhausted and then take an end-of-life retirement is how I kind of differentiate it. I think of it as that's the end-of-life retirement model. I still use the term retirement, but I really like mini-retirement. Some people call sabbatical. You know, these frequent breaks from work early in your life when you can pursue a passion, travel, whatever you want to do, stay home with your kids, start a business. You know, you can do it with a low-risk approach if you are financially independent.
Yeah, the old 4-hour work week approach to life, basically. Yeah. Love it.
And I love the principle behind that. The 4-hour bit I never got. I run my own business now. I'm like, oh, good for you, Tim, if you can do it, but I don't know how you run your own business in 4 hours a week. Oh my God. But you know, the mini retirement thing, I totally get. The lifestyle by design, the intentional structuring your life so that you can afford to have discretion over your time is exactly where my head's at, and that's what I hope everybody can realise is possible.
100%. Yeah, I'm right on target with that. There's no question about that. Tell me, so that rolls in very nicely into Money School. Talk to us about Money School and talk to us about the recently published book, which is exciting.
That was exciting. Yeah, that was a nice surprise, actually. I got a call from Penguin Random House, which was that doesn't happen. Yeah, that was. Come on,
tell us that story, because that's pretty rare. So I'd love you to share that.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know how rare it was until I talked to some publishing people. But so I'd been Money School had been an idea for about 8 years. When I got that call from Penguin Random House. And so I'd started in 2010. I mentioned my first mini retirement. I wrote this book for kids, and I started the company Money School. And the book that I wrote was for 6 to 8 year olds, and it was self-published, and it was a picture book about saving. And I used two twins who each got $100 for their birthday, and this example of, you know, one saved and one spent, you know, like kind of a fable, if you like. You know?
Yeah, love it.
And that was where I thought I would start. I thought, I'll teach kids, you know, get them reading books, and then it sort of evolved over time. Every time I took a mini retirement, I would think more about this idea of, well, what would you teach? And I started developing a curriculum. And then when my daughter was 18 months old, so that was mid-2014, my mother said she could hear how bored I was. And so she moved from Queensland to Western Australia to help me with my daughter so that I could do something, whatever I wanted to do. And I decided I wanted to work on Money School. So that's when I really started work on it in earnest. Yeah. And I started creating a curriculum and blogging, and just I got invited to do seminars, and then started to get paid to do seminars for, you know, government departments and stuff, usually on a specific topic, like superannuation or on shares or on budgeting or on something. Yeah. And that sort of built up over time, and I noticed through blogging, I write really long articles, you know, like one of them's 5,000 words long. It's they're big.
Love it. No, I love it.
Yeah. I found it, you know, it's a good way to structure your thoughts, right? Yeah. Writing, I find, very good way to get, because I can, as you can tell, I can talk. It's not a problem, but getting structure requires some writing. And so I'd had some people, because I talk a lot about financial independence, and I hadn't learned about the financially independent retiring early movement until early 2018. I didn't even know it was a thing. I didn't know there was a term for it. And that's actually where time rich came from, is because I heard the retiring early piece, and I went, no, that's not what they mean. None of them retire early. They mean they're time rich. Yeah. And that's where I started blogging about that. And it turns out I'd been quoted in an article in April 2018, and this amazing commissioning editor from Penguin had seen the article and clicked on my name and gone and found my site. She'd signed up for a free ebook I had and started reading my blogs, and then I got an email through my online system that I thought was spam.
As you would.
Asking, I was like, that can't be real. But she had said, would you be interested in writing a book? And I thought, that can't be real. But I'm just going to call the number just in case. And lo and behold, it was Penguin Random House headquarters. And so that's how I got found. So it feels like up until that point, I mean, to be fair, I knew people were starting to read because the Barefoot Investor tried to buy Money School in 2017. And so I knew it was actually starting to get people were actually starting to read it, but it still feels like you're screaming into the void a little bit when you create content. Yeah. It still feels like,
totally. I'm right
you're
with
not
you.
Sure.
I'm right with you. I've got no clue most of the time how people perceive the podcast or my book. It's just the occasional person will say, hey, that was really good, or it's like, is it? Yeah. Oh, great. I'm glad.
Yeah, exactly. And let me reassure you, people are listening and people are reading, but they often, you don't, unless you're actually chatting with them. They'll be like, oh yeah, I did see that article, or I did hear that topic, or whatever. And they do get excited. So it's nice to know that it does get absorbed. But that was actually a bit of a shock for me. And it was the same day that I got offered a spot to talk at a TEDx as well. So I was like, oh, people are actually listening. This is amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it was good, but it took 6 months to negotiate the contract. That was was full on. Yeah, it was an education because you mentioned before, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I'm now very much like done as a deadline. I won't keep working on something. I go until we hit the deadline. I set tight deadlines, but I wanted to know how those contracts work, so I spent a long time on that, and then wrote the book fairly quickly. But then the editing, 5 rounds of editing, was full on. It was
that's the best part,
really intense.
I know myself that the book the manuscript that I wrote and the book that was produced looked completely. The content was all there, but it was in different order and different shape. It was a much more readable and a great experience. It really forced me to look long and hard at what I did believe and how I wanted to express it. What about you? Did you find the same?
Exactly the same. Yep, I'm very fortunate to have had so many pairs of eyes. And first of all, I'm an engineer writing a book. Like that. That in itself is a small miracle. Because normally we talk in dot points and numbers. So I was very glad to have the help and support. I know I'm being very generalist there. There's plenty of engineers who are much better communicators than I. But the editing was definitely the high value bit. And actually, there's one image in the book which is this fire supply water diagram that. It took me a good 6 months to get to. It had like 4 or 5 iterations that were completely different. Yeah, but that is the thing that the value I got out of it was like, a plan on a page. I think a plan on a page is what I wanted, and I felt it was really satisfying to get there. So, it was good experience.
Yeah, likewise. I learnt more about myself writing the book than ever, and I'm much clearer in my messaging now than I ever was beforehand because you force yourself to actually try and communicate it in a way that people are going to go, yep, got it, like it, I'm going to do it.
Exactly.
Hey, let's rewind a little bit there because you sort of skipped over a little bit of gold there, I thought, when Scott Pape reached out to you to try and buy a money school. Talk to us about that little exercise because that would have been some fun and games, I'd imagine.
It was amusing. So I have a trademark for the Money School logo and composite words that I got in 2014 when I got serious. And I have, the moneyschool.org.au URL, and I've got the business name, the trading name. And Scott was keen on the brand and also keen, I think, my interpretation is on less competition because, as you would know now, he's interested in educating in schools, and that was sort of me working with kids was sort of what he was sort of seeing in the future for himself. And I have since learned that I think, the only one who said no. I'm not the only one who's been approached, but apparently I am the only one who didn't sell. So, we had a discussion.
Let's go there.
Yeah.
Why did you say no?
Oh, look, he was, it was one of these things. I had a phone call. I had a message on my machine that said, this is so-and-so from Barefoot Investor. Can you call me back? And I had a moment of sheer terror because I have spoken before about I don't like some of the Barefoot Investors stuff. So, there's 90% of it's great, but some of it he's oversimplified. And there's one piece of advice that I really dislike, which is he says in that first book, money and marriage, it's all joint. You should have all your accounts together. So I've had like 22-year-olds going, I just bought a property with my boyfriend, so we're combining all our accounts. I'm like, please don't do that. I think that's actually not good blanket advice. Some of the blanket advice is good. I don't like that piece. Anyway, so... I'm
going to jump in there. There's another piece that I'm with you, that 90% of the principles are absolutely spot on the money. There's a couple that aren't, and he has an aversion to property because he's a financial planner and therefore doesn't get paid to suggest property, but he actually poo-poos property, and it's like, well, let's look at this balance. I reckon it's shares and property. It's not shares or property.
I'm with you. Yeah, totally. And I remember, so I didn't read his book because of the invitation to write my book, and I was very conscious I didn't want to read it until I had written mine. So I actually didn't read his until like after mine was signed off. Yeah. And then when I read it, so what I had got was bits from his column, like I'd seen him talk about money and marriage and I'd seen him talk about property. And the thing on the money and marriage, that was an instant. That's like a no-go fail for me. You can't say that to women. You just cannot, especially with financial abuse. Great. And I don't care. Right, I just can't agree with it. But I'm similar on the property. What he had said on the property and I could be misquoting this, but I'm pretty sure he said people buy property because the value doubles every 10 years. And I was like, no, they do it because people pay it off for them. Like,
Yeah.
it was an oversimplification that I thought was unfair. Anyway, and I also, I get that I don't like credit cards. I don't like people paying interest on credit cards, but credit cards have excellent fraud protection. So, yeah, anyway, there's a few things like that where I was like, Anyway, I had some videos where I was saying, look, love the Barefoot Investor, but don't like this technical point. And I was like, have I been exposed to defamation at all? And I'm very confident that I hadn't, but that's what I thought the phone call might be about. So I called them back very nervous, and they were like, would you consider selling Money School? That completely took me out of...
Yeah, it would have thrown you off the chair, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, I thought I was going to be calling my lawyers. Anyway, and I was like, I really like Scott. I really, I liked his... I'm grateful that he's out there getting people thinking about this stuff.
Sense.
He's really cut through.
Absolutely.
But, my friend said to me as we were going through the negotiations, and I had this chat with Scott, and he was explaining to me why he liked the brand and what he wanted to do, and he was explaining how, he just didn't want me using the phrase Money School, and, because he was keen on having the Barefoot Investors Money School. And my best mate, I was talking to her on the phone saying, what should I do? Because, realising that he's got this massive reach, should I find a way to partner with him? Should I, or should I sell this thing? And she said, what are you going to do if he teaches kids that money and marriage has to be joint? I was like, well, that's it. We're done. It became a sort of, and that's actually, and it was a luxury that I have. I don't have to make money from this business. Yeah, I can afford to say no, and so I said no, and he said that's fine. And then in 2019, Foxtel announced a show, Barefoot's Money School, which was pretty funny. Yeah, that was pretty funny.
How did
and
that?
I got.
Did you?
That was
you trademarked the name.
Oh, well, yeah, it's trademarked in Class 41, and TV shows are another class. 41's education. So technically it's okay, but because he had approached me to buy it, it was pretty clear that he knew that there could be a conflict. So it all got resolved. They changed the name. I sent a letter to him and to Foxtel, because there was a chance that Foxtel had made that choice and he hadn't been informed or something like that. Right. I doubted that, because I know he's very possessive of his brand. But anyway, who knows? We'll never know. But, yeah, after that, that letter, they took their time about it, but they did change the name. So it's now Barefoot Investors Money Movement TV show. So that was a good case of, I'm glad that I stuck up for myself, but I wasn't happy because I thought, well, he had my number. He could have called me. He could have asked,
Well, he had. But he had called. That call had been made. 2
years previously. Yeah, exactly. So, so I wasn't delighted. But, of course, I at that point, Penguin, because I had originally wanted to call my book Time Rich. Okay. And because I like that bit, but everyone was like, no, that sounds like a meeting book, like about how to make your meetings more effective. Oh, okay. So they decided they wanted Money School. So when I wrote to Foxtel, I was able to say, my book called Money School will be coming out in the same month you're releasing that documentary. So I don't know if that had any influence, but Penguin were very clear they wanted me to communicate that. So, it's good to have it sorted, but I was not impressed to have read that press release. It was a bit of a shock. Of course. Yeah, everyone sent it to me.
I'll bet they did. But tell us about the book then, while we're talking about it. In terms of if someone's picking it up, what can they expect to read, and what can they expect to take away from it, Lacey?
Yeah, it's pretty much a fundamentals book. So it's not for someone who's an advanced investor. But if you were talking to a teenager or a 20-something and they were like, where should I start? It's that kind of book. Yeah. It's designed to be a very back to basics. Here is how you get to financial independence, and it's 3 rules: save, buy assets, avoid bad debt. Those are the 3 rules, and here's how you apply them. And it goes through how to use each type of asset. So very basic assets, of course. I've just gone with cash, bonds, shares, and property, just the fundamental stuff. Explain how each of those work. Talked a bit about how retirement funds fit into that. Though, of course, I advocate for, if you are young, don't think about your super, have the assets outside of your super, because you can get access to them earlier. And then there's just ways to speed up. So some of the strategies are a bit more risky, but there's options for how to spend less and how to increase your return from your investments. And then there's a risk management piece, which is around how do you not slow down. So what are the different things that can go wrong? And so that's the sort of guts of it. And then at the end, I talk about what happens when you're time rich. So what the benefit is and how you can consider structuring your life afterwards. So, that's the book in a nutshell.
A couple of pieces of gold that you could share with us that the readers could immediately adopt. Can you think of one that would be pretty handy out of all of that? But let's look at the saving piece. That's probably the starter piece for most people.
Well, that was the one I was going to go for, is I think we all get told, and this is something that also annoys me. This is the engineer in me, right? Like the best engineers are lazy engineers who want to solve the problem once, okay, and they don't want to have to deal with it again. Just automate your saving. There is no reason why you should be doing saving manually at the end of the pay period. The moment the money comes in, or even from your paycheck, often a company will allow you to split your salary into multiple accounts. You might even be able to do that, but just do it first, do it automatically, and make the savings account hard to get to. Don't have it on cards, hide it on your net banking, and you will be surprised how quickly you rack up savings. That's the thing. Automate. If you can automate, please do it.
Oh, you are talking my language. We've developed this thing called the Kick-Ass Saver System, it's actually a remote control saver system. You just set up 3 accounts.
Awesome.
And the only one you focus on is a debit card, because the residue money ends up in that. That's your discretionary saving. When that's gone, it's gone until next pay. The rest you can't touch.
Nice. Yeah, and see, that's the thing. I'm totally budget by bank balance. I don't budget. I hate budgeting because it's boring.
Yeah.
So it's just whatever's left is in my account. That's how much I've got. And the savings you can't see, so you can't spend it. Yeah, totally. I love it. Anything that's remote and automated, fabulous.
Love it. Yeah, because I mean, people are time poor, or they make themselves time poor. If you set and forget, then there's no excuse. So it's
exactly.
And there's no reason in this day and age why we can't be doing that. No, that's awesome. Talk to us a little bit about the buffer fund, because I call it a war chest, but you call it a buffer fund.
Well, it gets a lot of different names. Like, war chest is a great name for it. Emergency fund. I think of it. It's a big, comfy cushion of savings that you're going to land on. In an event of an emergency, right? So something that you can't predict goes wrong, because we can't predict everything. No matter how organised we are. Like, who would have predicted 2020? Like,
exactly.
And if you. The point of it is, if you don't have some savings, and all of a sudden your income's cut off and you've been living paycheck to paycheck, which I think has been a really scary outcome that we have seen, how many Australians have needed to access their super early, or have needed to go on JobKeeper or JobSeeker, otherwise they wouldn't be able to eat.
It's scary, isn't it?
Yeah, you're really vulnerable, and you won't sleep well. I think of it as my sleep well fund, because I know that if I wake up in the morning and all of a sudden every share in the world has tanked, I've still got cash. I will still be able to eat for the next 5 years, right? Like that's the moral of the story. So that's what I think of it. Yeah, and I guess the buffer thing probably comes a little bit from my chemical engineering background, because a buffer is a technical term in chemical engineering where it gives you space. You have these buffer tanks where you can build up a bit of stock so that you don't have everything slow down. When you're running a refinery, it can't stop. And if you suddenly have a mill breaks down at the front and you don't have anything sitting in reserve in a buffer, then suddenly you have to turn everything off. It's a disaster. So you need these buffers to make sure you can keep this process steady. And that's where I think probably the term came from.
Love it. This is where in parallel again, we always put people in a position where they've got anywhere between 3 months to 2 years breathing space. So if the world turns to poo, then you just don't have that stress. And you're right. My wife Sonia and I have forgotten what that stress is, and don't even think about it anymore. But when we were first starting off, when it was hand to mouth and we were living lean so we could put money into investing, it was pretty tough. And it was almost week to week to start off with. And that is a pretty scary concept that does create a lot of underwriting stress that you're probably not even aware of at times.
Well, and the interesting thing with that, I don't know if you've seen this, they did some great studies on it in 2013 or 14. Financial stress lowers your IQ.
Is that right?
So the theory is, like your brain has got so much cognitive capacity. Like, think of it like a CPU in a computer. You've got that much space. And when you're stressed, and this happens with any type of stress, but it includes financial stress, there's a part of your brain going, how am I going to eat? How am I going to cover the rent? How am I going to pay that bill? And it actually reduces your IQ by, on average, 13 points.
Wow.
So imagine trying to make a really important decision when you're short 13 IQ points. It's like trying to run a marathon at, 87% capacity, right? You're hampering yourself, and that's a big part of it for me, because a lot of people, there's this theory, a bit of a, poor people make bad decisions. No, people make bad decisions because they're poor. Once you take away the financial stress, they can make better decisions because their IQ rises. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Gold. That is gold right there, and what a great motivation to help people with their money management, so we take that stress away, make people brighter, and we're all making better decisions.
Exactly, and you can totally relate to that. Though, you hear the people who go for a payday loan, and you go, "Why would you go for a payday loan?" And you're like, because they were so stressed, they had no other option, and they couldn't think about the other options. As a lot of the problem. So, yeah, the more we can do to get them out of that cycle, the better chance we're all going to be better off.
Yeah, I love it. Hey, I'm going to do a big leap here then from that to your dream lifestyle, and I'm going to weave some financial independence in here. Describe what your dream lifestyle is. It might be what you're doing right now. And
it's a bit of a variety. Yeah,
what's it look like?
I think. Well, I quite like, I mentioned before, I'm a much better campaign worker. I'm much better if I work intensely for short periods, 3 to 6 months, and then have breaks.
Yeah.
So anything that sort of allows for that. Because I've got kids and my kids are, kindy, primary school age, a lot of my life is around making sure I have free holidays. So I like working, during school term, but my work is a mix as well of working on my businesses and volunteering. That's what I quite like, having that choice.
Yeah.
And that ability to give back is really satisfying. But I mentioned before when we were chatting before we got onto this discussion, I'm also going through a period now where my mother is unwell. She's going through chemotherapy. So I'm probably going to get an involuntary lifestyle change, being a carer, but I'm delighted that I can do that it's the choice. So I think that's really the overriding thing for me, this ability to make a decision with the information I've got at the time, and not have that worry about how I'm going to eat.
Yeah, and you hit it there. It's making the choice, and for me, financial independence, everyone's got a different definition, but it's about having time and being able to make choices is the key piece. For me. It's a difference between what I call being rich and wealthy. Most Australians are rich, but you're only wealthy if you've got time on your hands. And the measure for me has always been, if I turned off your work income today, how long could you sustain your current lifestyle? And fortunately for a lot of Aussies, we're talking days and weeks, not months and years. So it's
no, it's terrifying.
It is, isn't it? It's a scary
this
concept.
last crisis has shown it. 1.3 million people accessing their super. It's not a small number of people. It's a large proportion of people who don't have some kind of insurance in the form of cash.
Or they're raiding the piggy bank because they can. Yeah. And I mean, putting your home loan on why the government decided to call it a repayment holiday is the biggest furphy you would ever believe, because they're going to pay for it big time. It's going to kick them in the butt.
Exactly. The banks will be rubbing their hands over that, going,
loving
thank you.
It's an absolute gift to the banks.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
exactly.
Interesting. Okay, well, look, what I'd love to shift into now, if you don't mind, is the infamous ambush round, Lacey, which is the 5 quick questions that I get your tap dance on, that the listeners love to hear your words of wisdom. So if I can kick straight into that, your favourite quote and why?
This is one that it's recently become my favourite because of what's happening in the media. And it's a quote from Brian Cox, and I'll read it to you so I get it right. The correct statement of individual rights is that everyone has the right to an opinion, but crucially, that opinion can be roundly ignored and even made fun of, particularly if it is demonstrably nonsense. So this is my response to when everyone says, everyone's got a right to an opinion. I'm like, yeah, but not if it's clearly wrong. So that one's become my favourite one of late. So thank you, Brian Cox, for that. Yeah.
That is a cracker, actually, because everyone's got a microphone, everyone's got an iPhone, everyone's got a camera. So we're all politicians and we're all journalists these days, and we all think that people care. So
exactly.
It's pretty scary. You mentioned a couple of books during our chat. In addition to your own, what's the top book that you'd recommend people read and why?
I love the George Clason Richest Man in Babylon for entry level for people. I know it's written in the Yoldy English style in some ways, but it's a really good fable way to learn it.
10%.
And then if you're going to read fiction, I recommend everybody reads the Ender's Game series by Orson Scott Card. He's amazing. His writing is beautiful, and it's certainly a nice vision for the future, the way he thinks about life.
Yeah, I haven't read those. I'm a mad reader. I've got a library on my Kindle, so that's what turns my brain off at night when I'm trying to wind down. So I'm going to have a look at that. I'm going to come back to you and ask you about that. Awesome.
Yeah, cool.
Complete change in subjects here, but it's something that Australians feel pretty strongly about in terms of a lot of them feeling they pay too much tax. What's the top legal thing that you've done to minimise the tax that you pay?
I've got a business structure that makes the biggest difference to me. And I've only ever done legal things because I have an accountant for a mother.
Yeah.
But yeah, having a business structure has made the biggest difference to how much tax I pay overall.
Yeah, no, totally. Spot on. Flicking back to the investment subject then, and I want to cover both ends of the equation here. What's both the worst and the best piece of investment advice that you've ever received, Lacey?
Oh, I think making the saving automatic, and my mum pointing out, it's not what you make, it's what you keep, is the best advice I received. As for worst, it's very much time dependent, right? Like some advice can be great at certain times and terrible at others. And I think the one thing I'll always regret is letting my stepdad talk me into buying timeshare and seeing that as an investment when I was 21. So I will forever kick myself for having purchased timeshare every year when the maintenance bill comes.
Yeah, I don't need to go there. Yeah, I hear exactly what you're saying. On the personal habit front then, because what I've found with successful people is that it's what they do day to day that accumulates into sustainable success. What's a personal habit that you believe contributes most to your investment success today?
I think the auto saving is not even a habit anymore for me because it just happens, right? I don't even have to think about it. But if you haven't built that habit, it's the number one thing. Apart from that, knowing what helps you sleep well is the biggest thing for me. My test with everything when I make a big decision is, will I sleep well if I do this, or will it really upset me? And I do it with almost everything. So I would ask myself that several times a day. Is this the right does this feel right for me? And that helps me make good decisions. I trust my gut a lot more now as a result.
So good. Yeah, one of the core questions that we ask of everyone that we help is, what's your sleep at night factor? Because everyone's different, and if you're doing anything at all that's keeping you awake at night, you shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, totally.
So, yeah, no, love that. Final question then, Lacey, and this is a big one, but if I gave you a microphone that spoke to every single one of the 7.7 billion people that's alive in the world today, and I gave you 1 minute to talk, what would you say?
I won't take an entire minute, but I would probably wax lyrical explaining this. I would try and get across it's not what you make, it's what you keep. That idea of you have to save, you have to be planning for your future because no one else is going to do it for you. If I thought I could brainwash everybody into us all being egalitarian and looking after each other, I'd go a different tack. But I think while we live in in what is probably a global capitalist society on average, then it's about what you keep.
Yeah, no, very well said. Absolutely spot on. Been an awesome conversation. I reckon we've just touched the surface on this, so I'm going to sort of throw the door open to getting you back on to delve deeper into some of the subjects. We might dissect the book at some stage so that we
that'd be great.
Break it down, because I think there's some real gold that is worth sharing there, Lacey. But for those that would like to reach out to you and perhaps do some of the courses that start to open their eyes to how they can see money as their friend, not as an enemy, and it start to use it as a tool that's going to assist improve their lifestyle, what's the best way for them to do that?
Definitely have a look at the website, so moneyschool.org.au. I offer a few courses. So first of all, if there's anyone listening to this who is in high levels of debt, I have a free course on how to get out of debt. It's half an hour, short and sharp, designed to help you get yourself out of debt, which is obviously really important if you're thinking about financial independence. And for those particularly, I've got a passion about helping parents teach their kids about money. It's an area where some parents, even if they're good with money, feel a bit sort of unsure about how to proceed. So I have got a couple of courses that the first part of it is, here's all the skills you need. So you get that as an adult, and that's called the Achieving Financial Independence course. And coupled with that is Raising Financially Savvy Kids, which is a set of activities you can do with your children, adaptable to their different ages, to help them get a financial education if you're worried they're not getting it at school.
Yeah, I love it, covering both ends of the equation there. That's brilliant. Awesome. You've got an intro course there on shares, and I'm going to throw something on it at some stage. I'm going to help you put one together on property as well.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that's my next mission. I just know that the property one's got to be a lot bigger. Shares one is actually quite simple. Maybe I'm overthinking it. But yeah, no, that'd be, I really would love to see some basic intro ones which get people speed on the concepts, so then you can make decisions that work for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Much less about recipes, much more about structure, and here's how you can assess these things. Yeah,
I'm with you. It's all about providing people with all the information that they can then make an informed decision on what feels right for them, because unfortunately it's the old habit of you just don't know what you don't know. And once you can open up that world, then people using that sleep at night factor as the guide can then put together a something that actually works for them, not this one-size-fits-all exercise.
Exactly.
That is absolutely brilliant. Been a really great, energetic conversation, Lacey. It's great to be spending some time with someone who actually sees the world the same way. So we'll be supporting you holus bolus now on where you take Money School from here. So really appreciate you devoting some time to share with us today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Bushy. It's been delightful. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks. Talk to you soon.
Cheers. Thanks.
Well, freedom fighters, how good was that? To get a summary of all this investment gold in the show notes, just email me on hello@khgroup.com.au. It's HELLO@khgroup.com.au. Or check us out at www.bushymartin.com.au/get invested. I look forward to joining you next week for another episode of the Get Invested podcast. So thanks for listening, and as always, dream as if you live forever and live as if you die